Art is how we decorate space. Music is how we decorate time. That quote is from Jean-Michel Basquiat. This episode is about how we decorated the 80s. By the way, I'm not reading Basquiat. I read an article about Willie Nelson in the Oxford American, and it was quoted there in an article by Willie Nelson's kid. But still, pretty good quote.
Making me feel all dumb and stuff.
Yeah, well, I couldn't. I had to look up how to pronounce Basquiat, so don't feel too bad. So anyway, the 80s rocked, man.
They did. I think this is the season of top fives, and you and I are in a few minutes going to talk about our top five albums each from the 1980s. And I swear I could have come up with like five top fives of just shit that you listened to
I
that I
know, I
didn't want to
know.
listen to. I was like,
Yeah, I am going to go out on a limb here and say our list is not going to overlap.
I'm actually going to say that it does.
You think so?
I tried to be religious about it being the best, not my favorite, but the best. And I don't, not a lot of the stuff I listen to qualifies as the best.
All right, well, that's fair enough. We're each going to have individual lists in this case, as opposed to trying to come up with an agreement as to what was the best. And that was primarily my thinking was is we both were just listening to such different stuff. And as you said, for our episodes this season, we're going to try to come up with lists of top five things. But the real problem is how do you define what's a top five thing? Of course, that's what's so fun about making these lists in the first place, and especially when it comes to music, and especially before what would you say the mid '90s? You and I probably rarely agreed on what was the best. We just did like listening to each other's music, and I think that helped us going forward because we found stuff we'd never heard before. But that doesn't mean we necessarily thought each other's record collections were the best.
Well, if I could have found that song by Keel where he screams the entire song, it would have made my list, but I couldn't find it. I don't think it's on the streaming service.
I did scream a lot to that song. I do remember.
No, I think you're going to be either unpleasantly or pleasantly. I decided to go with best and not my favorite because I don't know. As I thought about it, I'm not sure the Night Ranger deserves to be on a top five list anywhere other than the
Well,
fact that the top five songs I listened to the most in college.
I assumed that four of your top five were going to be Night Ranger songs, but and that is kind of I have to admit I kind of went with the songs that meant the most to me as a top
Uh,
five. However, my musical taste in the 80s was probably closer to the masses than yours was. I hadn't found things like alt country because I don't think it really existed yet. I didn't listen to a lot of punk, and of course, 80s was a good decade for punk. But the songs I saw listed on Rolling Stone and other websites that were, or the albums that were punk albums, I thought, I didn't listen to those. I don't know if it's fair for me to say they were the best, even though in retrospect, they probably deserve, well, they definitely deserve to be on the list. And in retrospect, I may have listened to more of The Clash in the last, 10 years than I did some of the songs that are on my top five. So it's kind of a weird list for me because I don't think I was able to be as neutral as maybe you were.
yeah, mine was a little bit easier because I listen to such bad stuff that I could just I was thinking like who's the best hair metal band that I listen to?
Yeah,
I'm
it might be a tie of all of them.
somewhere in the bottom half.
But all right, before we go on and talk about our list in detail, uh, let's talk a little bit about how we listen to music in the 80s, because it's so different than how kids in their teens and 20s listen to music now, or for that matter, how we listen to music now. Uh, but also, I think it changed for us. The early 80s were high school for us, and the late 80s were college and after. And for me, my listening habits changed drastically when I got to college.
Yeah, I think the fact that we have a show dedicated to the top five albums highlights one of the biggest differences. Like albums, we've talked about this before. I won't belabor it in this one. They've sort of lost their relevance. I think people focus more on singles, and actually, a lot of artists release a bunch of singles before they release albums nowadays. But we used to study those albums. Like it's where Third Song In came in. It's,
Right.
how was the third song in? How does the fourth one? Blah, blah, blah. How cohesive was the album? How different than it sound than the last one? So that's one big difference.
Yeah, for sure. I think in high school though, I was probably closer to the way kids listen to music now, which is to say I listened to singles and didn't always just go out and get the album or look for the album. And then once I got to college, that changed drastically to me. First of all, you would listen, people would say, people we knew in school would say, you got to listen to these guys and put a whole album on, and you'd sit, drinking a beer and listen from start to finish to like, Love and Hope and Sex and Dreams for the Bodines, for example. I can remember doing that in a fraternity house with a guy who was a year younger than us, who was from like Racine, Kenosha, which is where Bodines were from. And he was like, yeah, these guys are local. You got to hear them. Well, I would never have heard them 2 years earlier when I was in high school because basically I got almost all my music from radio. And it wasn't just top 40 AM radio at that point. I was listening to FM radio and album oriented rock. But again, you just hear hand-picked songs as you went through. And that changed, like I said, that just changed for me a lot when I got to school because I met people who had different musical tastes and frankly better musical tastes and had regional musical tastes too. So you'd get bands that you'd never heard of before.
Yeah, I guess if you go back, it was definitely radio. I'd be stuck in the car with whatever my mom was playing, which I would hate. Generally, she'd be listening to the adult, uh, whatever the adult stuff was, like the soft rock.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so in the car, and I'm sure I had a radio at home and a stereo. You'd be able to switch back and forth between the couple stations. I listened to WEBN out of Cincinnati, which was the rock station. And then I guess what is it called? The modes of delivery, the albums to the cassettes to the CDs. And the CDs made it a lot easier for us to sit around in our fraternity room and fast forward to the actual songs we want to listen to.
Yeah,
Or not fast
yeah.
forward, but skip ahead.
I don't think I got a cassette player until I was probably like a sophomore or junior in high school. And then I started buying cassettes, basically buying albums, except they were in cassette form. My parents had an album collection and I listened to their albums. So I listened to Pearl, the Janis Joplin album from start to finish. I listened to, my parents' Harry Chapin albums from start to finish. So I had that exposure to the full length, experience of an album, but they were all older. They were all 60s and 70s albums. And the songs I was listening to that the kids at school were listening to were all just coming off of the radio, just singles that you would hear. And of course, you'd hear them over and over and over again, especially on AM radio. I got a cassette player. I want to say probably junior year in high school, and that's when I started. Like that's when I bought my first Bob Seger album. It was as a cassette, not an album, and that's where I heard my first. I can remember who did I have? Oh, I'm literally drawing a blank. Oh, Hank Williams Jr. for some reason.
Mm.
And I think I heard a song on the radio, and then I bought the whole album. And turned out I liked the album. That didn't last long, but that was, I can remember those were like two of the first cassettes I ever bought. But then sophomore year, maybe in college, is when I got my first CD player. And you're right, that changed everything. It changed how you could listen to songs, how you could listen to albums. It also changed how you could make mixtapes because it was much easier to record from a CD to a cassette than it was cassette to cassette. And that's when I started, and I actually remember you doing the same thing. We would just sit in our room junior year and, sit by the CD cassette player stereo we had, and we'd be in there for hours making mixtapes.
Yeah, and I was thinking when you were talking that I had cassette Walkman.
Yep.
I had a CD Walkman when I got advanced. And then, of course, the big upgrade was the iPod Mini. I had that. And that you'd have to download a bunch of music onto your iPod. but you could listen to it however you wanted. I thought that was the revolution for me, was the iPod Mini.
Yeah, that was amazing. Yeah, that was you could exercise with that. It was tiny. It's kind of hard to jog with a CD Discman. I don't care
I did
what
it, man.
exactly. Yeah, first of all, it weighed like 2 pounds. Second of all, I don't care what they said. The
The skip
anti-skipping
thing.
measures, right? That didn't fucking work. Not when you're running. Cassettes
Yeah,
were
not at
definitely
all.
better for that.
Yeah, and for me, listening to my parents' music is where I got Bob Seger. So I had Bob Seger, Creedence Clearwater Revival. That was another album. Of course, Kenny Rogers was a big one
We hit some of
back
that.
then too. The Gambler. That album was, I think every house in America owned the album The Gambler. But yeah, and then I've talked about it before. But the first album I bought was Dire Straits' first
Right.
album with Sultans of Swing, and then I started to buy Seeger albums, and then we talked about walking through the record store. I mean, that's what our staff picks is all about. Walking through and finding something that just looked good, even if we didn't know it sounded good.
Did you do that before you got to college? Did you do the record store thing like as a senior in high school or junior in high school?
Maybe a little bit. I must have maybe at a Borders. I think maybe Borders stores were around. I'm not sure, but not as much as I did school at college.
I don't think I did until I got to St. Louis and got to, well, found University City, which had two record stores at the time. But I don't think I ever went through a record store and thumbed through things. I don't think, I graduated from high school from in a small town in Western PA called DuBois, PA. And I don't even know if they had a record store. If they did, I don't know about it. The only place I would see records and cassettes were like at the Kmart or whatever the version of it was there. That was a huge kind of a turning point for me musically is when we discovered Street Side Records on Delmar in St. Louis, and we discovered vintage vinyl, and you could just go and spend hours thumbing through the cassettes and the CDs and even the albums just to find something new and to see the staff picks up on the display, those kind of things. But I didn't have any of that in high school. I was again, I think one of our very first episodes ever of this podcast was about the bubble, and we talked about kind of being growing up in a bubble and not being exposed to the rest of the world very much. And that was definitely the way it was for me, musically speaking. And it opened up a little bit as a freshman, but a ton as a sophomore. And truthfully, when you and I were roommates as juniors, that's when we both kind of, even though we were playing each other the music we already had, that's when we started going to Street Side and started finding out about other stuff. And that's when things changed. And so that's right in the middle of the 80s, right? I mean, we were,
Yeah.
freshman year was fall of 84. So what you're talking about is probably fall, spring of 86, 7-ish in that era. And that's when I kind of not only listen to more music, but listen to more different music. It's definitely the kind of I don't know, the blossoming of my realization of how much was out there.
Yeah,
Did
and
you
I
think I
thought
was blossoming then?
yeah, I saw you blossoming like a flower, my friend. And I thought I might have a post facto, but Borders bookstore actually started in 1971, so it preceded us. I don't think that's where I shopped though, not till after college. I think actually I might have bought it my first album at like a Kroger. I think it was a superstore, and they
Right,
had like
right.
a little record section.
Yeah, that's what we had was that kind of thing.
So you're not talking about a big variety. So I probably it was like the Dire Straits was probably the only album that was halfway decent there. So
Yeah, and you talked about that album just an episode or two ago and how you love that song and didn't like the rest of the album for quite some time. I actually listened to it all the way through about a week ago or so, just because of that. And that's a great album, man. That really,
it
truly
is.
is a great album. But I also don't think I would have loved anything other than Sultans of Swing back when I was 18 years old or 17 years old. So I think I would have reacted the same way as you. But man, that's what you should listen to it again soon. It's awesome.
Yeah, I know that I liked it after. It was just my first
Yeah.
shock of like, going from, I was in the Night Ranger my junior year in high school, maybe sophomore, and then 38 Special. So
Right.
Dire Straits was a little bit more of a cerebral type of music and stuff.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. What a great album, though. I mean, what a great band in general.
Yeah.
So, do you want to talk a little bit about the top five albums, not songs, not musicians or bands? Some we may do bands someday soon, but the top five albums of the '80s for Chris Derrickson or the world.
Yes, I do. Hold
Uh,
on. I wrote them down because we have to keep these secret from each other.
exactly. Should we alternate and go from five down to one? Is that the best way to do this?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right.
I will start. And the first one on my list is the first homage to my turn to more Americana. I've moved away from his stuff a little bit since, but his first album I thought was groundbreaking, and was one of the more influential for alt country or whatever you want to call it. But Steve Earle's Guitar Town 1986 was just a fantastic album. And I will still go back and listen to that one, along with some of his other stuff. But that one has emerged as my favorite album of his overall, all the stuff he's put out.
Wow. So it may be possible that we do have a little bit of crossover.
The next one's going to surprise the shit out of you. So,
Really? Okay. So that was your number five then? Is
yeah,
that
it's fine.
okay? So my number five won't surprise you and probably deserves to be on the list in terms of records sold, but maybe not quality. But I just couldn't get past how much I love the album and how much I played the album on just a regular basis. And that was Private Dancer by Tina Turner from 1984. So 84 is the year we graduated high school. It was definitely, I was in the midst of listening to top 40 radio. So I heard it, all the time. But the fact is, and that's just, the song Private Dancer. And then there were like two or three other songs from that album that became big hits. But the album as a whole is just awesome, awesome Tina Turner. And her voice and it's just, it still takes me back. Again, I listened to this one about a week or two ago, just in anticipation of this. And I don't know if it's musically the fifth best album to come out in the '80s, but for me, it definitely was. It was just fantastic.
Yeah, I can't say I'm surprised about that one. That was one that I was not tempted to add to my list. You play that all the time.
Yeah, yeah. No, I didn't figure we would cross over on that one, but I also couldn't fail to choose it.
All right. So number four for me is one that I listened to, but it wasn't something I played a lot, but I don't know how you don't name it. Because I tried to be a little representative of different types of music. But I went with Straight Outta Compton by NWA, just for its influence. And actually, there was a couple you could decide from. Public Enemy's album. I think it was maybe 90s, but I listened to Ice-T a lot more, as far as more, I guess what they would call back then gangster rap. This one is edgy, hard to listen to, but spot on. And you could play it today and it'd still be perfectly relevant, sadly, to where we are today.
Yep. Yeah, that I absolutely agree in terms of best of from a kind of neutral perspective deserves to be on that top five list. It didn't make my list. Frankly, no rap, no hip hop made my list because
Really?
I was a little more personal about it than I think you were. I didn't endeavor to try to take a step back as much as I think you did, but I can't argue with that being on a list of the top five for sure.
I'm a little surprised that De La Soul didn't make it for you. I left that one
It's
off because I thought it would.
It is on my long list. I'm staring at my screen, and you might find this hard to believe, but I have about 20 songs in front of me, and I I love that album. But I started to think that I don't think I listened to it as much until the '90s, and that was so again it's kind of more of a personal perspective thing. But I listened to it a ton when we were living together after graduation like when I was in law school, but I don't think I listened to it as much in the house before, before 88, 89, that kind of thing. So, but you're right. It came out in the 80s and again, from a 100 feet in the air perspective, it probably deserves to be on my list. However, it didn't make it. What did make it was, for my number 4 choice, was Graceland from Paul Simon, which came out in 1986. That I know I listened to a ton in the 80s. Strangely, well, I shouldn't say strangely, because I think it worked that way for a lot of people. It opened my eyes to all the other kind of influences that there are on pop music in general. Obviously, it was Paul Simon's homage to African music in general, and I loved it. I listened to that frequently throughout the 80s, and beyond as far as that goes. Another one I just listened to recently, and he's an amazing songwriter, but his ability to craft songs and then meld them to African rhythms and perform them with African performers, it really opened my eyes to what could be done by way of collaboration, and it's just an outstanding album. That one, as opposed to The Private Dancer, I think Paul Simon deserves to be on basically anybody's list of 80s albums as being some of the best stuff that came out.
Yeah, and that one was one that was my real number 4, to be truthful. I just thought I'd take a step because I knew you were going to choose that one.
Yeah, it's probably easy to predict that one, I guess.
But it was a fantastic album. Like I listened to it today. It was played everywhere. I mean, it was super popular then, and as you said, the influence is unmistakable. So for number 3 for me, this one pained me, but I did have a personal connection to the band because they blew me off in a concert. But I think Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction is from '87, is a great album all the way through, super influential, and I hate the band now, but I have to give them props because from the opening chords of Welcome to the Jungle, I think that's the first song, but it is truly a great album. And I think this is a controversial, but I think they sort of just coasted the rest of their career and never topped their first album.
Yeah, that again, hard to argue with that as just being one of the most influential.
If you're looking at that genre, it was hard for me to pick anybody else but them. I mean, Slash is an amazing guitarist. They're a tight band. And at the time, before he was twice as big as he is now, what's his face? Axl Rose was one hell of a lead singer.
Yeah, that guy's voice was insane. And I was not a fan of Guns N' Roses. I wasn't really a fan of that album. I didn't really listen to that. That's one that after, like, into the 2010s even, I finally realized how important that album was, and just how unique they were as a band. And like you said, maybe only for that album. It may have just been that, but that's a definitely worthwhile. So my third pick is, in fact, Guitar Town by Steve Earle. Again, 1986. The truth is, probably listened to it. Well, definitely listened to it throughout all of the 90s. But I started listening to it before the end of the decade, and it became Steve Earle is an artist that you discovered for me, as far as I'm concerned. You're the one who came home with the CD, I remember. And it changed everything about the way I listened to music and who I listened to, because that was just the jumping off point for finding all of these insurgent country, alt country, bloodshot record types, but also the Lyle Lovitz and the Rodney Crowells and all of that stuff. That Guitar Town album was so important to me going forward that I could probably pick it as, I mean, it came out in the 80s, but it's also a huge 90s album for me because it was just always one I went back to.
First overlap. I like it. Hold on. Opening my Google Journal. All right. Number 2 on my list will surprise you. And it wasn't usually in top 10s on lists that I looked at, but Springsteen's Nebraska.
I thought it was possible, but I wasn't sure whether you would put it on your list. And since we had gotten to number 2, I figured it just didn't make it. But that is
No, I think
interesting.
for one, you listen to Springsteen, I listen to Seeger. That was the album that allowed me to cross over, and then I started listening to a lot more. I saw Tunnel of Love on a bunch of lists, but for me,
Yes.
Nebraska is his best album.
Yeah, Tunnel of Love is on my long list. Born in the USA is on my long list because I listened to that a ton, but it became more important to me, I think, later on, later in future decades. So number two on my list is the album Purple Rain from Prince, which came out in 1984. It is one of three Prince albums I have on my list for the 80s. I also had Sign of the Times. I also had 1999. But the soundtrack to the film Purple Rain just, first of all, I listened to it a ton during that period of time. And it was my entree into those other, it made it okay to listen to the other Prince albums. And, in many ways, they're probably better, musically speaking, but what a great collection of songs. That movie, we've talked about the movie in past episodes. It was one of those things that I just, as I said, it just kind of opened the door to him as a musician, as a songwriter, as a performer, and it's just an outstanding album. So my number two album of the 80s is Purple Rain, which came out in 1984.
All right. 2 out of 5, my friend. My number one is Purple Rain.
No kidding. Ah, that's
Yeah.
impressive.
I almost put two Prince on my list. 1999, I think, would have made my number 5. But I wanted to show some variety. But 1999 opened me up to Prince and his genius, and Purple Rain overwhelmed me. Everything you said, but the movie, the experience, the songs, and it was everywhere back in the 80s,
Yeah.
and it was fantastic. So these aren't things that I listen to. A lot of these aren't things I listen to all the time. Springsteen I came to later, but even Prince I was listening to back then. I think I maybe tried to hide it from you. But 1999 is what started it, as I said, but Purple Rain is pure genius.
Yeah, I have to agree. And by the way, 3 out of 5 because my number one is Nebraska by Springsteen. So I I did like other Springsteen stuff, and I don't think I actually really listened to Nebraska until after I had listened more to Born in the USA, for example. But I just when I discovered Nebraska, so it came out in 1982. I don't think I discovered it until I got to college. But so probably in 85 or 86 is when I discovered it. And I couldn't get enough of it. And again, if you and Steve Earle opened the door to all the alt country and Americana that I love to listen to so much now, Springsteen did it, and I didn't even realize that's what he was doing back in, when I started listening in 85 or 86. It's a masterpiece of an album. The biopic that just came out in 2025 is about the writing of that album by Springsteen after he had such, big success with The River, I think it was. It's clearly it was a very personal album for him, but it also just struck a chord, and it was so desolate and dark and kind of artistic to see somebody who you kind of considered a pop artist to be able to do something like that is just amazing to me. And that's definitely my number one album of the 80s.
Well, and if I'd played it straight, we would have had 4 out of 5 because I would have picked Paul Simon.
Really? Oh, wow. That's pretty amazing then. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Much more matching up than I thought. But again, I thought I was going to hear about some hair metal. I thought I couldn't even remember when some of those albums came out, but I certainly figured I was going to, which album was Sister Christian on? I figured I was going to hear about that one. And
Midnight Madness.
Midnight Madness, that's what it was. So, all right. I have to admit, though, had a couple honorable mentions, was really on the fence for that fifth choice, and even the fourth choice. Like the 4 and 5 slots could have been any number of other albums that came out. There's so much great music that came out in the '80s that people still listen to a ton. But did you have one or two that you didn't pick that you really felt like you should have?
Well, it was the other two that I considered, and they'll be popping up in other places on the show. The Smithereens album, especially for you. That one opened my eyes as much as any, just from the opening chords. I had a buddy of mine recommend it, and they were such a different sound than I listened to. Even the Americana stuff, they were, it was a power pop. They weren't punk, but they had that punk attitude. And that one was really close to making it for me. I decided to use it someplace else. And then I would have had to pick a Seeger one. The only one that I thought was worthy, because I thought he fell off, Against the Wind is a really good album, but it still doesn't compare to a '70s album. So and that one will also show up somewhere else. So
Yeah, I actually did expect to see that album. It did think I was going to see some Seeger on your top five. I had it really was a three-way tie for the number 5 slot. I ended up going with Tina Turner, but two of the other albums that came out in the late '80s that I just loved and listened to death were Strong Persuader, the blues album by Robert Cray. Came out in 1986. Love that album. Just couldn't get enough of it. And then also Tracy Chapman's debut album from 1988. That was, and I didn't really talk about this as we were going through everything, but so Tracy Chapman, her self-titled album was Rolling Stone's number 10 for the '80s. And what else did we have? Purple Rain was number 2. Graceland was number 5. And Nebraska was number 43 on Rolling Stone's list, which, I don't always agree with Rolling Stone. I certainly don't agree with them on this one, because despite the kind of personal nature of my choice, it's got to be top 5 in the '80s, no matter how you look
yeah.
at it, in my opinion. But it's very interesting to see. We had a couple in the top 2. We had 3 in the top 10, I think. Although I don't know where Straight Outta Compton was. We have to kind of look at that. I didn't pull up the site as we were recording here today. But I got to say, though, when you look at that, so we have overlapped 3 of them, right? So we have 3, basically 7 great albums from the '80s that I think if you haven't listened to them recently, you should go back and listen to them. And if you're younger than us and have never heard them, what the fuck is your problem? Go back and listen to those albums. And listen to them from song 1 all the way through to the end, because that's the way those albums were meant to be listened to, and it makes a difference.
Yeah, and in the end, I could have gone with stuff that is Night Ranger-ish, but you know what? We're a show of integrity, so I didn't want to ruin that.
Are we?
Yeah.
We're a show of integrity?
It sounds good.
It does sound good. Yeah, because I'm looking through, because I said I've got a list of like 20 or 30 things. I have a couple U2 albums on there. Neither of us picked a U2 album for our top 5, but Live Under a Blood Red Sky was another eye opener for me. And I know I listened to that the summer after I graduated from high school is when I discovered that live album. A friend of mine gave me the cassette, and I've loved U2 since then. They've been up and down as far as I'm concerned, but that live album was phenomenal. You said De La Soul, that 3 Feet High and Rising. I listened to that a ton, although I think more in the '90s than in the '80s. We talked about other Springsteen albums. The Police, Synchronicity came out. That dominated the airwaves for a while. We didn't mention Michael Jackson or Janet Jackson. They probably deserve some kind of honorable mention, I imagine. And then the Rolling Stone number 1 song. I don't know if you looked at their list, but they're number 1 for the '80s. Neither of us picked, and it was London Calling by The Clash. And again, I don't disagree with that one. I think that deserves to be in top 5 of albums in the '80s, but I didn't listen to it in the '80s. So for me, it was one of those where it took me a while to discover a lot of stuff, and that's why that didn't make the list. But I still think it's a pretty goddamn good list, and it'd be fun to go through and listen to all those again
and again.
and again.
All right, that's our top five albums of the 80s, and that will bring us to Loft of Wisdom.
You better open up your eyes, babe, because fools do get wise.
You may remember that we decided to finish our Loft of Wisdom and not do this as a segment anymore after our 100th episode because Jope had such a great quote to finish it all off with. But you know what? We changed our mind, and it's our podcast. So we're going to keep doing it because we like quotes. We just love them. So I opened this episode with a quote. I was quoting somebody who was quoting somebody. So to give due credit, there's an article by Micah Nelson, Willie Nelson's son. The article's titled "Decorating Time." It was in the Austin Music issue of Oxford American, which came out. It says winter 2025. It's their Southern Music issue. They do it once a year. Love this issue. Love this magazine for this issue. But he quoted Jean-Michel Basquiat, and the quote I want to put up on the Loft of Wisdom for this episode is, "Art is how we decorate space. Music is how we decorate time." And I think that describes at least our feelings as well as anything I've ever read.
I agree. Great quotes. I did say that I would revisit the Smithereens, and I decided to add them to the Loft with the lines from the opening song on that album, Especially for You, which was pretty damn close to making my top five. Strangers When We Meet. I love the song itself. I love the lyrics, and I'm quoting, please don't look my way when you see me on the street. We will still be strangers when we meet." So basically an illicit love affair. She breaks it off with him and tells him to act like she doesn't know him and like he doesn't know her anymore when they see each other, because she's still in love with whoever else she was with. It's a sad song, as a lot of the Smithereen stuff is, but upbeat, which is why I loved their music, because I could act like I was upbeat and still be sad at the same time.
I love that song. I have to admit, I kind of forgot about the Smithereens as an 80s band for this episode. And maybe I was thinking that's another one that I listened to more in the 90s. But you and I know, went to see them live, and I believe that was in the 80s. I don't think it was after 1990 that we saw them. But I just remember them playing that song live, and just what a great show, what a great band. I kind of messed up and forgot about them.
And a great venue. That was at Mississippi Nights in St. Louis.
Yeah, that sure was. All right, now we have Post Facto.
It's a mistake. It's a mistake.
Post Facto is where we correct any mistakes, complete any thoughts, or just finish updates on things that we mentioned in the show and didn't quite, like, for example, if we finish reading a book, we might want to give an update on how that book turned out. What do you think, Tom?
It's funny you should mention that. My post facto is to review a book that you talked about, I think, in season 1 of Third Song In. I'm not sure. I actually went back through the old outlines to try to figure out when you brought it up. Way back at the beginning of this podcast, you mentioned that Willie Vlotton, the lead singer, I think the lead songwriter for the band Richmond Fontaine, was also a novelist. And you mentioned a book called The Horse, a novel called The Horse. And as I said, I tried to go back and figure out when we talked about this, because I think it was over a year and a half ago. But I couldn't figure it out because our record keeping is for shit. And all I know is that you've mentioned it. You mentioned him because you love Richmond Fontaine. I don't love the band as much as it turns out I love him as an author, because I finally got around to reading The Horse. Finished it about 2 weeks ago, or a week ago now. And what an excellent, excellent novel that is. It is a book about a songwriter in a way. It's also just a book about someone who's lost his way, I suppose is one way to put it. But it's really just a book about somebody's life. And it's written around this concept of him kind of living by himself in a camp up in the mountains, like an old mining colony or something. And a horse shows up that's all beaten and sick and possibly blind. And he uses that as a springboard for all these recollections about his life as a musician and a songwriter. And I just loved it. I thought it was fantastic. You had recommended it. It just took me forever to get to it on my list, and I'm happy I did. I would recommend it highly. And as a post facto, I think it's important to refer back to when we talked about it.
Couldn't agree more. That was one of my favorites. That was one where he tours with that young band,
Yes.
and much older than them, but that was that was a cool part of the book and also very tragic. But yeah, it's a classic Willie Lawton song put into a book.
Yeah, exactly. You could hear him singing those lyrics. It's kind of a fictional autobiography because you're right. He talks about that, and that was kind of the end of his musical career. But then there's also, without spoiling the book too much, there's also stories about when he just started out with a band, and he was the young guy, and it feels really desolate. It's got to me undertones of Cormac McCarthy, but I also feel like it's a little more optimistic in its overall outlook, even though a lot of the individual scenes can be a little depressing. It's about how music, saves people, and I thought it was fantastic, and I just thought I got to talk about this on the podcast because I think all we were able to do last time was drop the title. We really didn't go into it in detail. And based upon your research, which is obviously your record keeping is much better than my record keeping. It's not as long ago as I thought, but it is. It was from episode 5, season 6. Did you make that as a staff pick or a recommendation, or did it just come up in conversation?
I think it probably came up in a previous episode. That was the post facto. That's where I could find the reference to it, was that I had finished the book too.
Oh, okay. All right. So season 6 was probably about a year ago, I'm thinking. Since
we
we're
were
in
still
season
doing
11.
yearly. Yeah, we were still doing yearly recommendations then.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we've both read it. We both recommend it, and you should go read it immediately. I already bought another one of his books on my iPad. It's on that list now. I want to read more of his. So speaking of recommendations, it's now time for staff picks.
Just around the corner from you.
And staff picks is perfect on this episode about albums. Tom and I's attempt to recreate the idea of walking into bookstores, movie stores, record stores, looking for new stuff and looking up on the board to see what the staff recommended. So anything new, either new in general or new to us, is where Tom and I will make a staff pick. And I'm going to start since I handled that so terribly. I'm going with Tim Easton. He has a new single out called Don't Let Your Mind Grow Dark. It's a good song, but I'm really recommending it to have folks check out Tim Easton. He's a really good songwriter, and he'd sort of dropped off my radar. I remember I went and saw his tour. It was in the early 2000s, but it was for the album The Truth About Us, that's from 2001.
Wow.
That's one of my favorite albums, and he has several since, and I'm guessing that they're good, but I haven't really been paying attention. And this new song is going to help me go back and check out what Tim Easton has been doing for the last 25 years.
Yeah, I love Tim Easton, and I didn't know that there was something new out. So that's very exciting to me. I started listening to him with, I think, Special 20 was the album. I don't even remember when that came out, but that was probably also early 2000s. And I didn't realize that you'd seen him live. I would love to see him perform.
Yeah, he opened up for somebody, and I'm not going to remember who it was now. That's a great update by me.
He sang it somewhere and with somebody, and it was good.
Well, I know for a fact it was in Annapolis at the listening room there, which I can't remember the name of. But hell, I'm doing that'll be a post facto.
Gotcha. All right. So my staff pick was my effort to get in front of D on a staff pick, because I just have a feeling if I hadn't put this on the outline, this might have been your staff pick for this episode, because you are a big fan of the band Pecos and the Rooftops. And to give you credit, I'd never heard of them until you told me about them. And I think we've got a song or maybe even two on playlists in the past with the podcast. But they just came out with a 2-disc set. It's funny to say that because most people won't actually get discs, but it's like a full-length album times 2 that is called From Me to You. And I just wanted to get to it before you because I'm sure I didn't listen to it before you listened to it, but I really liked it. Musically, I think it's a little poppy. It's a little closer to kind of Nashville bro country than I typically like. But the songwriting is much better and sharper and really funny. And the lead singer's voice is just really interesting. He has that deep, deep kind of, it's not your typical Nashville country voice for sure. And the lyrics are hilarious. I think it's the first song on the album is called 11 Beers. And there's some lyrics from that I just wanted to read. I'm going to do a full-on Derrickson recommendation and quote part of the song. It goes, I quit whiskey last Friday night when I used my last DUI. Now I stick to Miller Lite because I got shit to do. And I just fucking love that. It's from the perspective of a working guy, you know, but it's just the phrase, when I used my last DUI, just makes me giggle every time I hear him sing it. And the other thing, again, just in terms of the sense of humor, the title of the final song on disc 1 of this 2-disc release is Fuck Myself. So, and it's just how he continues to make bad decisions. It's really great. It's a really good album. I actually considered a co-staff pick because I am sure, A, that you had already listened to it before I did, and B, that I just got it on the outline before you were able to do it.
You bastard. But no, I agree with you. I can listen to him in smaller doses, mainly because of his voice and his songwriting, but it is a little more pop, and his voice has enough of an edge to it because it's that deep. He sounds much older than he is, I assume, because I've seen pictures of him. He's got, the long hair, almost mullet-like look. But he certainly has a deep, mature voice. And the song Burn Pile is one of my favorites. It's this upbeat song about burning a guy to death, who his girlfriend was cheating on him with. I hope you choke on the smoke. You can make love to a ghost. I think I remember those lines by heart. I won't call it a guilty pleasure, but I didn't, when I first heard Pecos in the Rooftops, when you gave me the song, I was like, okay, maybe. And then the more I listened to him and the more I closely listened to what he was saying in the songs, it's worthwhile. And this is a great album. So that's my staff pick. Nice choice, bastard. All right, that'll bring us to our playlist picks. Playlist picks are essentially the core of this podcast, where Tom and I will each choose a song to add to a season-long playlist that's available on all the various streaming services. With this being the 4th episode, this will be songs number 7 and 8. And I'm going to start because I already sort of gave it away. This is where Bob Seger shows up. So I put the song Against the Wind from Against the Wind on our playlist. I could have chosen several. I think it's a really solid album. And I know you're surprised I didn't pick it for my top 5, but it's hard to compare against stuff like Strangers in Town and Main Street. Yes. Which were just 2 classic albums from the 70s. And even his live albums, I think he did 9 to Night in the 80s. And I didn't like that as much as Live Bullet, which was, I thought, a better live album. But Against the Wind is one of his classics. You'd previously chosen You'll Accompany Me for another playlist, so I stayed away from that one and went with the title track. Yeah, this was a really hard one to pick a playlist song for, just because of the subject matter. I re-listened to parts of all of these great 80s albums, and I originally was going to do what you did, and I kind of regret not picking a song from someone who I didn't put in the top 5. But I did decide to go with a Paul Simon song from Graceland, which was my number 4 album for 80s. But it's the song Crazy Love, Volume 2. And I don't think I've put a Paul Simon song on any playlist yet for Third Song In. And I love that album, but in particular, I feel that's an underappreciated song. There's certainly other songs that got much more airtime on the radio. And I do think it'll be a nice, actually, it sets off Against the Wind nicely too, I think. I think those are 2 good songs for this installment of our season 11 playlist. I agree. Hopefully I said season 11, or maybe I didn't say season at all, but check that. Fix it.
Sure, we'll fix it. Just go season 11, and then I'll cut that and put it in somewhere.
Season 11.
Welcome to season 11. Third Song In is recorded in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and Joliet, Illinois. You can email us your questions, your comments, and your suggestions to thirdsongin@gmail.com.
We also ask you to check out our website, thirdsonginpodcast.com. All kinds of stuff on there. You can listen to the podcast right from the front of the page. You can read Tom and I's blogs, Tom and my blogs. We have all the various lists on there, the playlists. We have stuff about our previous guest on the As Mentioned page. Just check it out. All kinds of shit on that site.
Yeah, please follow us, rate, review, and download the podcast wherever you listen to it. It goes without saying, you need to give us all your fucking stars. Give us the best ratings you can. Share the podcast. Tell people about it. We are in season 11, and we plan to plow through, but we'd like to reach more people. So please help.
We'd love to reach more people. Another way you can help us out is by sharing our playlists. As I said, they're all on the streaming services. We also have special playlists anytime we have a guest. Most times we have a guest. Any of these playlists you can find by searching for the phrase Third Song In.
Yeah, please follow us where you can on social media. We have a Facebook page. We have an Instagram, Blue Sky accounts. Follow us there and you will find out about all kinds of things Third Song In, but you'll also hopefully see links to what's going on with our past and future guests.
In addition to the podcast, Tom and I also put out a blog. We take turns putting one out each week. They're on our website, as I talked about, but you can also subscribe to them on Substack. If you do that, one, it helps us out, and two, you can get the blog directly in your inbox on Friday mornings.
Please join us next week for our interview with public school educator and yoga instructor Bobby Peel. You've been listening to
Season 11
of Third Song In with Chris Derrickson and Tom Polachek. Thanks for listening.
All right, I got like 3 minutes, so let's roll.
Gotcha.
The
Third
person
Song
said they
In.
can-
Yeah, let's roll while you fucking stop me again, you son.
Season 11.